that we moved our day of the week, so we didn't clash with them, has moved theirs today.
Oh,
So annoying.
Definitely not ideal.
We moved our day of the that was YouTube streaming in the background. Cool. Did Natalie prepare the slides?
yeah, she shared them with me. I don't know, is she joining this evening?
I thought you and her were hosting.
Yeah, that's what I thought as well. Maybe, I don't know, maybe she's joining a bit later, but yeah, we have the slides. When we get to the icebreaker part, Jonathan, do you wanna pop the questions? I don't know, because I always forget how you start
now,
them.
here we go, polls, and we then click launch.
Yeah.
All there. So I can show you I launched it.
Okay.
You can fill it in.
Oh, host and panelists can't vote.
No, you can't. And then,
Yep. Okay.
and then, yeah, so I then just need to relaunch that poll now.
Are we having the questions at the end after both speeches?
I thought there was icebreaker at the beginning. Oh, do you mean the other questions?
Oh, the questions for the, yeah.
I didn't set that up. I can set that up now.
So
Did
people
you
can
have
like-
a copy of them handy?
Oh, what do you mean?
Do you know what the feedback questions were? I haven't got them handy.
Oh no, I don't have the, oh, the fallback questions. No, Natalie, do we have any fallback questions?
Sorry, what is this for?
Some months we've done like follow-up questions, just like ask how people found it.
Do you mean like feedback at the end?
Yes.
Oh, those follow-up questions, yeah.
Is there time to quickly put one in?
I can add them if you just want to tell me what they are.
What did we do last time? Was it just how did you find today's event?
Yeah, something.
Oh, I think we asked feedback on the timing.
The times and the number of speakers.
Yeah, but I feel like we don't need to ask that again because.
Why don't we just not worry about it and not stress it out?
I'll be right back. I'm just going to put in some contact lenses because I've got in some screen glare,
yeah.
but I'll be back in 2 seconds.
So can we do multiple choice?
Yes.
It seems so.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I feel like the multiple choice ones, I feel like they're,
yeah,
some of the choices are not necessarily obvious. Like, oh yeah, I can actually use data for that. So that's why I was like, maybe it's good to have multiple choice instead of people saying like, oh, what is data used for? Marketing, Netflix, that kind of stuff. What else? The questions for the speakers, do we have them at the end or after?
Yes. So we
each speaker.
We prepare them in Slack, remember?
Yeah, after each talk. So if you're introducing Paul Raluca, then you can do the Q&A after, and Jonathan and I will post some questions in Slack in that programmed in pencil channel.
Yep.
Yeah, Paul, no sneaking in the programmed in pencil channel.
No speaking.
We use that to coordinate our questions.
Okay, absolutely fine. In regard to, as a quick check, in regard to the presentation, I assume I'm just going to share my screen, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, apologies. Once I've given the presentation and then any kind of the questions straight after, I'm going to have to shoot tonight, but I'm happy to chase anything up at a later date as well. So any questions that come through after that point, happy to answer.
And Natalie, do you want to do the close up? So I'll do like the intro, ask the questions you post on Slack, and then I'm guessing you're going to do the, how do you say, not the goodbyes, but the
yeah, so after Adelana's talk, I can do the closing. Yeah, is that what you mean?
The closing, yeah.
The thank
you. Thank you. Okay, nice.
Are you happy? Can you share your slides? Because you're introing.
Yep.
I just need to grab my charger 1 sec.
I'm sharing this one. Does it look okay?
Yeah, looks good.
Okay, cool. This. Paul. Oh, there's a bit of a delay. Nice. Yep, Jonathan, do we know how many people signed up for this edition?
About 19. We've
that's
got
nice.
22, but remember some people won't turn up. But we will be pre-recorded. Well, we'll be recorded, so
Mhm.
I just need to make sure I edit them video this time because I haven't edited the past 2 ones.
This has got all this like pre-banter as well in the other ones.
Yeah, but look, I edited all the videos down. It just takes so long.
Yeah.
Although if the YouTube streaming is working though, it's easier because I can edit it directly inside YouTube, so I don't have to download it and then back upload it again. Because my internet is rubbish, so I can't do much. It takes ages.
Yeah.
Can anyone see the number of people? Hi, Adlana. The number of people who joined.
Hi.
I can't see. I think it's just the
3
five
so
of
far.
us.
I can see it's 3.
Okay. Well, it's officially 6:30. Shall we give it 5 minutes and then start? That works for everyone?
Yeah, nice to meet you.
Nice.
How are things at Confused, Paul?
Yeah, they're good actually. We're just getting towards. I suppose the same for you guys. Though really, we're just getting towards like end of year planning. All of our appraisals happen in November, so it's been a busy few weeks, and it will be another busy week next week. But after that, things kind of die off towards December in data. Obviously, there'll be the kind of mad release week before change freeze. But aside from that, December's usually pretty quiet for us. What about you?
Yeah, also pretty busy. I think always in the run up to Christmas or the few weeks before Christmas. It's always quite busy. And also we just had Black Friday as well.
Oh right, yeah, no, I can imagine actually. Because you guys are focused on broadband at the moment, aren't you, as well?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, exactly. Did you go to RV Unite?
I did, yeah. Or at least I saw most of it live. Did any of you guys go?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a shame that we didn't. Shame that we weren't on the same dinner table in that case, I guess. But yeah, it was good fun actually. It's quite cool what they did. It's very kind of motivational, definitely.
Yeah.
I did like the strategy side of things. I thought it was quite cool.
Yeah, I thought the finance talk at the beginning was really good.
Yeah, definitely. To see like the differences between what everyone's doing essentially is I think it's summed up really nicely actually.
Oh, Steve was in Spain.
Yeah, as always.
Was Spain warmer than it is here?
It's not bad actually, to be fair.
Oh wow, yeah, it's pretty good.
I heard they have like 18 degrees around Christmas time.
Yeah.
I don't know what's better, 18 degrees at Christmas time or snow at Christmas time. We should have a poll on that next time for our next talk.
Yeah.
Okay, 2 more minutes and then we can get started. How are you doing, Adelana? Are you pumped?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. I'm excited. I mean, hopefully everyone finds it interesting.
I'm sure we will.
But yeah, no, excited.
Are you still in the office?
Yeah, I am. Yeah,
Lots of people there, or has everyone just gone to the pub?
everyone's gone. It's just me and Natalie, just here. I'm just hoping that the lights don't cut out halfway through the presentation, because they tend to be like motion sensor. So yes, if everything goes dark, please let me know. I will get moving.
You see Adelan standing up in the middle of her talk,
Yeah.
Doing a little jiggle.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we have 1 more minute left, but I think we should get started. I see there's 12 participants, so I just want to say welcome everyone to Programmed in Pencil's November edition, and this month's main topic is data. Programmed in Pencil, for the people who join us for the first time, is a bi-monthly meetup that brings together engineers from across the tech industry to listen to talks on digital product engineering. Please join me in welcoming our 2 speakers for the evening, Paul Farnell, Data Engineering Team Lead at Confuse.com, and Adelana Karti, Product Manager at RVU. If you have any questions, please feel free to post them in the chat and the speakers will answer them at the end because we're going to have a Q&A session. Right, so the first speaker for the evening is Paul. First and foremost, thank you to our sponsor, RVU. Please tweet any reactions or any questions you have to our talks at RVU Engineers. I am Raluca, and Natalie is going to be my co-host tonight. We're both software engineers working for RVU. And we're going to start with a little icebreaker. Jonathan has a poll he wants to share with us, a couple of questions. Jonathan, how's that going? Nice. Can everyone see that? I'm assuming that's yes. Okay. How much time do we have, Jonathan? 2 minutes? I'm guessing.
Yes. Sorry, I'm muting myself. Cool, I'll end that poll now.
Okay, nice. Right, can everyone see the results of the poll? Nice. Okay, well, I'm impressed people actually got the first question right. Like most of the people that got it, because I actually had to look it up. I had no idea there's like so much data we're just throwing out there into the ether. So congratulations to the people who, to the 75% who actually found the right number. I personally did not. Which areas do you think use big data? Nice, urban planning, news. And last but not least, have you had to work with data sets? Okay, so we have people who've joined us tonight who obviously know what they're talking about. So without further ado, Paul, do you want to share your screen and just share your talk with us?
Yeah, I think I need you to stop sharing.
Yep.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for coming along today. My name's, sorry, let me just start a timer as well. So I'm Paul Farnell. I'm originally from Essex, in a small town called Braintree, and I moved to Cardiff originally to attend university and study computer science. I moved back to Cardiff probably about 4 years ago. In between, I lived in Reading or that kind of area for work. And my career so far, or background, started off after university as a technical consultant at HPE. I then worked as a DBA at Corio as part of the managed service team, looking after various customers' databases for about 2 years. Moved back to Cardiff, primarily as a DBA, but I also took on some DevOps engineer responsibilities during that time at Deloitte. And as of February last year, I've been working initially as a data engineer and now as a data engineering team lead at Confused.com, or now RVU. My day-to-day hobbies tend to be hiking, music, is reading, not reading. I wasn't a huge fan of reading when I lived there, and complaining about developers or any kind of change to process that happens within the business. Today, I'm taking you through what I see as the kind of key differences between software and data development as they currently stand, how those approaches are changing, at least from my view, and what I expect the future to look like. I've thrown in some technical examples of why some of these decisions were made in the past, particularly around SQL Server, and why a SQL Server developer might approach a situation from a different kind of point of view as a software developer, and hopefully kind of share some insight into that world. But the kind of primary objective really is to provoke discussion around the differences and similarities of the two different streams, as well as what we kind of expect the future to look like and how it's going to impact both our business in general and potentially personal careers as well. So that's the kind of key aim. So to jump straight in, where I kind of see the kind of main differences of software engineering and data engineering. As a software engineer, generally, I feel that software engineers are focused on delivering value. So to the business, this usually means what are the new features that we can include. It's better to fail fast, test and proof of concepts, and essentially just look at what can we do, what are the possibilities, and what kind of value can we provide from that. And this generally kind of leads into a modular design. So very plug and play in terms of, as a software developer, if you're working on a project, it's very kind of insular. You obviously object oriented, program it, but it's kind of in and of itself, it might impact things further downstream, but the kind of main intent is the piece of the project that you're working on. On the other hand, with data engineering, it's a bit more focused on the larger picture. So rather than look at this is the exact problem, it's kind of, well, what other data is connected or related to the data that I'm looking at? What could happen in the future with that data? And it very much kind of runs from something called set-based theory. So rather than looking at how do I do something, it's much more what am I looking at and what does that involve? So to give you kind of a very real world, but albeit very contrived example from our website. So one of the questions, if you're looking to get a car quote from Confused.com, is do you have a dash cam fitted to your car? It's an optional question, but supposedly if you click yes, you could save some money as a customer. So it's in your best interest to click yes. And in terms of a data perspective, in terms of a software perspective originally, it's mostly add a question, make sure it fits, make sure the data is inserted somewhere and then it's referenced later, and make sure that it fits the formatting. Whereas from a data perspective, it's a bit more, well, okay, so we need to add a column then to our database. So again, it's a bit more complicated in the actual real world, but for the sake of this example, please bear with me. Where you might have a table of license plate, make and model of the car, and now that we need to know about the dash cam, we might have a 0 or 1 to say, yes, this person used a dash cam, no, they don't. But from a data perspective, you also need to ask, well, do we care whether it's front facing, or are we going to care that it's front facing at some point in the future? Yep, that's a possibility. So in that case, okay, maybe we have dash cam and rear dash cam then as our columns. We'll come on to why we might ask that question next in the kind of technical analysis. But essentially we start asking those questions. So do we need a front-facing and a rear-facing dash cam? Do we need to add other options for direction in the future? Probably not, but it's the kind of question that you want to ask. Next would be, is the model going to matter? So rather than a 1 or a 0 to say we have a dash cam, do we want instead the description that the customer puts in of this is the kind of dash cam that I use on the model? Do we want to trust the customer to do that? If we're going that method, our partner is going to ask us what kind of dash cams we're using. So in that sense, do we just use an ID in our table and then have a kind of pre-built list of all the dash cams and manufacturers and the descriptions? So this is massively, in some ways, over-engineering this, but if it gets to that point and you have that data and partners decide they want to use that data, all of these changes need to be considered and not necessarily done entirely upfront, but we need to kind of plan ahead a little bit, particularly in the final solution of having a dash cam table with the manufacturer and the description. Again, as contrived as it is, how are we going to handle previous data? So people that didn't insert it in the past, do we just assume everyone had a dash cam? Nobody had a dash cam? Those are the kind of questions that you need to ask before you start kind of making modifications to a database. And the kind of where that thinking comes from is in the next slide, to do with how this might actually impact the underlying SQL Server. So to give you a background on what SQL Server looks like, it's very similar to a B-tree, where essentially there's pointers saying, if we use car ID for this example, so if our record contains the car ID, the license or the registration plate, the make and the model, and yes or no to whether they have a dash cam, if we use the first example, if we're clustered, if we have a clustered index on car ID, which essentially just means, are we storing the data, or how are we storing the data physically? So if you choose to order it by car ID, it will just be a case of car ID 1, all of the information for car ID 1, car ID 2, all the information for car ID 2, and so on and so forth. You can have heaps in SQL Server, but it's generally not recommended, and I've yet to see a scenario where heaps were better, because for those of you that have seen them, SQL Server in particular adds a row GUID column in the background anyway, so it essentially isn't a heap, it's a table. It's just that you don't have control over that in the back end. So fun fact for anybody that has worked with heaps there, wasn't aware. But essentially it works in a way of, if we look for car ID 49, then go down the stream, everything to the left is less than 50, so it's going to be down there. And for the sake of this example, it's probably going to be at the page on the right hand side of the less than 50 column. So again, this is a little bit different to how B-tree might work, but all of your data in a SQL Server database is stored in pages. All pages are 8 kilobytes in size, and you might not get one record per page. You're probably going to have quite a few records, in particular for this table, because there's not a large amount of data. You're going to get probably thousands of records potentially on the page, or hundreds or thousands of records on the page. So that page is built in respect to, this is how much data I'm storing, and is built around that essentially. So all of our pages that we build are based on that. So if we decide to add a new column in or change a column, whereas it might just be like, in the business scenario, we're just adding a column, right? So it's very simple for a human to understand. We just want extra information. In SQL Server world, you're adding that to every record. And again, in the case of 50 items, that's not going to cause a real issue. But when you're talking about thousands, hundreds of thousands, or in some cases, billions of rows of data, all of that is going to expand essentially. And what will happen then is we'll get something called page splits. So at this point, all of those pages that have data in them and that they then become full have to split into, some of the data will go to page 1, some of the data will go to page 2. And during this time, this is extremely resource intensive. At best, your analysts or your customers might see some performance degradation. What's probably going to happen is the whole table will lock up, and for that entire time that we're adding this column, nobody can access the data. So you might accidentally bring down confused for X amount of time. Again, this is all kind of contrived. This could happen, it could not happen. We wouldn't let it happen really, but that's essentially what you need to account for. So although it seems like a very minor change on the front end of things, it's actually got a large knock-on impact if you're looking at the kind of the deep dive technical side within SQL Server. So hopefully that gives you an idea of kind of why we might approach the situation in a different way from a data perspective rather than software or business, just because there's a lot going on underneath the hood that people don't necessarily need to know or aren't aware of, and that's kind of what drives the planning in advance. So what's the solution to this? Is there a methodology that handles planning in advance? Yes or no? Yeah, it's the waterfall method. Just kidding. We wouldn't use the waterfall method. And to be fair, in the markets that RBU looks at, so Uswitch and Confused.com, the waterfall method's not something that really has any place in terms of those markets for us. However, the point I want to drill home here really is that the absence of waterfall methodology does not also mean the absence of planning. So when we're looking at specifically data structure and schemas, we do want to take a step back and think about what's the future use of this and how can we do it. And in regard to that, the current strategies really that I've seen, there's two main ones I'd say at the moment. One of them is going to be building an MVP, and the other one is designing it up front. So building an MVP, to give you an example with some of the stuff that we've looked at recently, the front-end developers have set up a Cosmos DB. It's very quick to build and therefore release, so it's very good for testing proof of concepts. It's easy to alter in the future due to features and structure. So having a JSON format or an XML format means as a software developer, you can really quickly test what you want to do and whether it's going to be applicable, whether it's going to work, and if it doesn't work, just bin it. So in that side of things, it's much, much better for prototyping. And equally, there's minimal learning to test the product itself. So it's pretty much once you've got it going, you can just throw data in, adjust the data at a later date and deal with everything programmatically. The cons to it really are what's the kind of cost implications if this does get productionized? Has it been optimized? Who's responsible for the maintenance? Is it going to be the developer that did the proof of concept? Is that part of their role, or do they just want to get something to market? In which case, who's going to handle that? And also keeping the schema standardized. So one of the benefits of things like JSON and XML is you can adjust the schema relatively easily, particularly in Cosmos DB where you can just throw data in. The issue is how do you kind of standardize that at a future date? So again, is it programmatic or is it something else? Whereas designing it up front, you get a lot of those features kind of built in. So in SQL Server, you can kind of enforce that schema, prevent duplicates in data, and enforce types. In terms of the data world, this is really important. So one of the key concepts of data is if you get bad data going in, you have bad data going out. So you really should be cleansing this at the point of entry, and then you don't have to deal with it later. But it's a kind of key component of good reporting is that we have to have good data going in order to ensure we have good data going out for business decisions to be made. Generally, maintenance is included as part of the design of that, and there's less chance of significantly making any alterations at a later date just because you've done that forethought. The cons, however, are it's much slower to build. You have to rely on other teams to get that built in, and there's a requirement on that expertise. And I'm sure as developers, you're probably aware, if you don't have full control of what you're trying to develop, it's usually quite a large pain point trying to ask other people to build stuff for you while you're trying to get the work done, essentially. So it is a huge pain point. I kind of added my thoughts on what I think the ideal world is, and it's something that we're moving towards within Confused. I know Uswitch actually have some really good examples of this actually, where they've built essentially a self-service template. So as a developer, you go in, you say, I want a database, and all of that part can be spun up separately. And it means that you can kind of get on with your day, block as much less. Maintenance is generally included as part of that framework. And again, it's minimal learning technology because essentially it's a one press button. I've got a database, I can now go work on it. The caveat to all of this is I would say you'd still want to consult other teams, particularly for things like schema structure and data. There's a lot of kind of gotchas in SQL Server that you might not be aware of unless you worked with SQL Server for a long time. So similarly to how if I went to design a web page, I probably could do it, but I'd probably not make it most optimal. I'd probably speak to some front-end developers to kind of get that guidance. So in terms of how I see this kind of impact in the future, I think a lot of concepts of software engineering are kind of feeding into data at this point. So I think software engineering is pretty much the leader in terms of don't reinvent the wheel. The way they do that is libraries and open source. And there's a big push for this because there's a lot of development going on. It allows for rapid development, and rather than have to make all that bespoke code yourself, you can just use something that's already been built and applied to what you're using. So a lot of that is feeding into data. It's just slightly different in how it manifests. So rather than kind of libraries and open source, it's a bit more of an abstraction of responsibility is how I describe it. So when we talked about page splits and performance earlier, that was a huge part of being a DBA, whereas in the new world, with stuff like Azure Synapse and Cosmos DB, all of that's kind of handled behind the scenes. You just choose how powerful do I want this to be, and it then goes away and does it for you. So that's what I consider kind of abstraction of responsibility. There's also kind of tools for end users. So a good example of this is Power BI, where Power BI has multiple plugins that hook in directly into Azure or directly into other data sources. So for example, tables in HTML. So you can just point at a website, steal the table information, and it does all of the data engineering side for you. So you don't need a data engineer, you just need somebody interested in the data. So that's kind of how it manifests more. There is a temporary move away from set theory, I'd say. So a lot of kind of old world SQL is built around set theory and what data do I need? What data does that interact with? Whereas I think particularly in data science world, and Python in particular, it's much more, I want this data, now I want to do some stuff with this data, now I want to look at what this data means in comparison to this other data, which is a very different methodology or paradigm compared to the old way of doing things. However, it's much more similar to software engineering, I'd say, where you're kind of looking at what do I actually need to do? How do I get there? What's the first step? It's very kind of methodical. And I think there's a temporary move away from that, at least, particularly with the new technologies in use. So why do I see this happening? I think most of it is due to data-driven business requirements. So the kind of key things that I'm seeing at the moment, particularly from business users, is how do we get access to business teams and users for the data so they can do their job? And how do we kind of enable them to do that without having to make a request to the data team, wait for it to be prioritized and then tackled? Speed of release, so how do we get things as soon as possible, and a quick turnaround on that. So the questions and theories. So if you have a question as a marketing analyst and it takes 2 weeks to come back, you've probably got a new priority in that 2 weeks, and therefore it's just not going to be used. So it's kind of empowering the user to use data to then drive their business decisions and therefore the business. So that's kind of why I see all this happening. In terms of what I see of the future, how do we get the most performance? Previously, it was kind of how do we get the most performance while spending the least amount of money? So anybody that's worked as a DBA previously or anything in infrastructure, if you ever worked with on-premise servers, you pretty much were stuck with what you had. So you had to put in a really big justification on why you'd upgrade the server, and usually the answer would be no. So as a DBA, probably the bulk of my work was how do I get the most out of this by altering the code rather than altering the underlying tin. And at the moment, it's much more kind of where's the current value. So this is for both software engineering and data engineering, but the current focus is where's the most value. So from a software perspective, that's what can we do next that's going to get us the most ground with our customers or affect the bottom line. Whereas for data, it's what data would be most useful to us. How can we use that to build something that will then generate profit? So again, the focus is more around speed of delivery. How do we get the data in? We'll deal with the structure later. So we'll bring in flat files. How do we build these proof of concepts? How do we build things fast, check that they work, and get all the business departments involved? Speed is no longer really an issue. So as a quick soundbite, one of the engineers within Confused.com managed to get 4 billion rows of data written from a database into the data lake in 4 hours for £20. Back in the day, that was impossible. Even using our current, some of our current structure, it just wouldn't work in terms of writing from one database to another. So that's no longer really an issue. You're no longer confined, which is great for speed of delivery and speed of release. But what I do think is going to happen is at some point, we're going to have to draw a line and say, how do we minimize the cost of storage, transactions, egress? How do we ensure that data is secure? So if everyone has access to the data, how do we make sure that's locked down and that people aren't kind of looking at the wrong kind of data that they shouldn't be? And also, how do we consolidate it? So this is, again, going back to good data in, good data out. If you've got 3 different sources of truth, that means you have 3 different departments in the business making decisions on at least 2 of them are going to be using incorrect data. So I think there's going to be a real push for how do we get that all in one place? How do we make it accessible still, but curate it in a way that business users can use it, but still make sure that they're still using that golden standard of data. So I think that's the direction we're probably going to be moving in going forwards. So in summary, I think software engineering and data engineering are to an extent merging, as they share a lot of similar concepts, a lot of overarching goals. Particularly a lot of the methodology and how you approach problems is becoming a lot more similar to each other. I do think we're going through a phase of, or a new phase of every company is now a technology company. I did look for who made that quote, but there's a lot of people that have penned their own name to it and created pictures of them online with that quote. So I don't actually know who the original quote was, but feel free to use me, as every company is now a data company instead, where we're just using data to drive decisions. And I think that's going to be the kind of the next transition stage for most modern companies. And then to summarize, the previous focus was more around minimizing spend. The current focus is on speed, how do you deliver the immediate value? And the future focus will be on consolidation and defining the line between software and data. So I think software at the moment is very much how do we get the event and the event architecture, how do we feed it into the lake? Whereas I think data engineering at the moment is more how do we get that data now that it's in, curate it, put it in a way that the business can report on. And that line's probably going to blur over time as new tools come out and new technologies, but I think that's kind of the defining part for now, and it'll be interesting to see where things go. So with all of that in mind, does anyone have any questions? Thank you for your time as well, and for listening to me ramble.
Thank you as well, Paul. Yes, there are some questions. Like I said before, please feel free to drop your questions in the chat. First one. What do you do to make data more accessible to less technical people in the business so that they can get value out of it?
So this kind of comes down to tool. Well, this comes a little bit down to tools, a little bit down to the BI department. I'd say tools is probably the best way of doing that. So I don't know whether you've used Power BI or Tableau, but a lot of it's very much drag and drop. So rather than have to deal with the data itself, you can just kind of have the tool drill into it for you. And particularly with Tableau and Power BI, if you say want to look at how many customers did we have in January, you would just drag the date column into the dashboard. You then just drag the number of customers essentially, or some form of unique customer IDs into it. It will sum it for you, and that's probably the best way. The issue really is how do you aggregate that in a way that the business still wants to use it. So different departments have different things they want to do. So from a marketing perspective, a lot of the time you kind of just want to see the general idea of how many numbers did we get, was this campaign successful, that kind of stuff. If you're working in fraud, however, you're going to want to drill into the data. So that one solution isn't going to work for marketing, but it's not going to work for fraud, because they need to see unique events rather than aggregation. But I think using the tooling is probably the best way to get businesses to adopt it and showing them the value of learning those tools, essentially, because at the end of the day, it's upskilling business users in tech.
Thank you. And next one, how do you strike a balance between storing the data in the most efficient way while also making it easy to use?
Well, so this is debatable. It's the classic answer of it depends. But personally, I feel you're better off creating one golden standard and source of truth, and then building from there. So if we take again a marketing department as an example, if we have one data lake with all of our data in it, then essentially on top of that, you want to then build another layer that says this is the data that marketing wants to look at. So you know it's from the source of truth. However, it's basically directed at marketing, so they can just instantly use that data. They don't have to worry about any noise. If they want more data, they can ask, and we can fill that in. But I think you kind of need one source of truth. Otherwise everything else after that falls apart, basically.
Okay, next one for the beginners. What tools would you advise people to check out if they are wanting to get more involved with data?
If you're not currently a data user, so you're currently a business user, I would highly recommend either Tableau is a bit costly, or Power BI. So Power BI or Tableau, especially if you use things like Excel at the moment. Power BI is written with Excel users in mind to an extent. So it's a very similar interface. It doesn't cost a lot. I think it's like, well, back in the day, it was £10 per license. So for the year, so £10 per year. But it does a lot of the kind of groundwork for you, does all of the presentation for you as well. You just need to focus on what's the question I'm trying to answer and show here. And it handles all of the kind of, this is how you drill into it in the background. So either of those options, if Tableau is an option in your company, great, use that. If it's not, then it's probably an easier sell to look at Power BI, basically.
Right, next one. What do you think is the best way of upskilling data engineers with old school SQL skills to newer technologies?
Ooh, get them involved, essentially. So it's the same way that it's the same strategy I'd use for teaching anyone anything technical is you can give as many lectures as you want on things like PowerShell or automation, but actually the only way you're really going to learn is if you have a project and you go do it. So for our team in particular, the plan's just going to be, we have X amount of projects this year. How do we spread that across the team? How do we get people to knowledge share? But the real answer, you can do exams, but I don't think you retain as much of that knowledge unless you actively get involved in the project itself. So having an objective of I need to do this, that will contribute to the business is probably the best way of learning.
Nice, thank you. I think we have time for 2 more questions. Let's see, which aspect of big data you find fascinating and would you want to share it with us?
It's a little bit scary, I suppose, as well. But I think the biggest thing is how efficient it can make things. So you probably don't even think about it day to day. But for example, how long you sit at a traffic light for, that could all be decided by data at the end. So although we complain about sitting there for a minute, it's because that will allow free flow of traffic and will prevent traffic jams. All of that's data at the end of the day. It's just that it's applied in a way that causes grievance for us. But there's a lot of decisions that you make day to day that you don't even realize are impacted by the data around you that other people have evaluated. And it's in some ways it's scary. So if you look at, for example, election results and that they can be targeted and modified, that side of things is scary. But on the flip side, Tesco had an example back in the day where people that were buying toilet roll would also, or baby products, would also buy beer. So Tesco put beer on the end of the aisle because basically what it was lots of husbands would be on their way back from work, pick up some stuff for the wife in the household. And at the same time, if beer was there, they'd be like, oh, you know what, I'll grab some beer to treat myself. And that's the kind of data that it's quite cool, it's quite efficient. And it's a little bit, I guess, targeted, maybe scary, but it's that kind of stuff that I think is really interesting.
And the very last question, what domain do you think is next to adopt database decision making, assuming there are domains that are still not doing this?
I think everyone's going to start moving towards it. I think the biggest adoption I've seen is probably in marketing. So there's a lot of tools within the marketing domain of how successful was my campaign. Just looking at how many people have clicked through on an ad campaign, or how many people have opened the email, how many people have unsubscribed. All of that is feeding into, I think it's digital marketing. There is a name for it, but I think they're probably the first to pick it up. And after that, I think it's going to be everyone, to be honest. I think it's the new, every company is now a data company. If you can't evidence your own decisions, it's very unlikely that people will listen eventually.
Nice. Well, thank you so much, Paul. Next up is Adelana. Let me just try and share my screen. Okay. Although it's maybe like for 30 seconds. So Adelana Carty, product manager at RVU. Right. Please feel free to share your screen.
Awesome. 1 second while I just share my screen. Just want to double check that it's all showing. Amazing. Can everyone see that?
Yep.
Perfect. Cool. So apologies, I actually did not put together like a slide introducing myself. So I'll just talk a little bit about myself before jumping in. So I'm Adlana Kati. I'm a product manager at Uswitch. I work on the broadband team. I'm actually from Slough, which is just outside of London. It's quite close to Windsor. Some people may recognise it if they've ever watched The Office. It is based there. It is also famous for having the Mars factory there. So I grew up smelling chocolate being made just a few yards away from the house. So I really started my career doing a different type of product development, which were physical products. So was working for Marks and Spencer as a buyer, and was working with design, but also working with suppliers and merchandisers in terms of making sure the products that people want and love are in stores ready for them to buy there. And then I moved into data and analytics, and then from there I've actually moved back into product development as a product manager. Cool. So today I'm just going to be walking you all through a bit of advice around how product teams can use data to build better products. So let's jump right in. Cool. So generally as product teams, our ultimate goal is to deliver a product or features that customers love. So that's no matter if you define your customers as internal members of your team or other business stakeholders, or whether they're external customers such as like businesses, partners, and consumers. And often as a product team, we're trying to balance the scale between, serving our customers and also serving the business. However, sometimes the data that we use to drive new products and features are usually presented at 2 stages during the product development process. So the first is around current performance, and that usually happens right at the beginning. So often these metrics kind of act as a trigger, meaning product teams frame their understanding about customers around the KPIs. So for example, how many customers did we convert into sales? How many customers can we contact? Did this customer perform this click action? Did this customer sign up to emails or accounts, or use a particular feature? And then we end up going away and asking customers, why aren't they converting or clicking? And or internally we'll come up with ideas and go through the development process of design and develop and testing them on customers. The second area is around A/B test results. So although on the surface it looks different, we'll hear the analysts, which are part of the product team, talk about significance and the minimal detectable effect, p-values, confidence intervals. But actually, what I'm sure you've noticed is that we're still measuring the same metrics that triggered the product development. So teams are kind of only looking at snapshots of before and afters. And what's actually happening is that we're missing what is initially influencing the metrics and why that could be happening. So like the deeper question and insights. And what we should really be asking ourselves are the real drivers around, why are we seeing this performance? What does a customer actually want? And how can we help them? So to figure out these important questions will also then help us understand which bits of product development will actually help us have the most impact on our customers. So the best way for us to make sure that we have like a holistic picture of customer needs to move our products from a hate to a love is moving away from using data just at kind of the beginning and end stages, and instead bringing in data at each point of the product development process to make sure that we're really setting ourselves up to drive impact. So today I'll just give a few examples of data and how we can use that in the process. Okay, so if we start at the first stage of the product development cycle around like identifying the problem, the issue, the opportunity, the first type of data to really look at is macro data. We're looking for data that helps us understand the wider industry context that our customer and products operating in. So this usually allows us to really set the context for what how our products are operating in the wider market, what are the wider top level opportunities and ideas. So we can do this by using data sources such as market trend data, using large consumer research reports, or if you're working on a product that's internal, looking at your companies or teams like 1 year, 2 year, 3, 5 year goals. The focus here is to ask questions that really answer what is it that we are seeing in the market, and is that trend short term, medium term, or long term trend? Will this change the way our customers behave? And what direction is the market or the industry moving towards? So a good example of this would be the COVID pandemic that affected businesses across the globe. So we saw some companies fold, especially in the retail space. They went into administration. Some industries essentially grinded to a halt. So the travel and hospitality industries, which is more of a short to medium term trend. But a long-term trend that we've actually seen as a result is the impact on customer behavior and where they're working. So demand for hybrid working and working from home for more office workers. And so what you would then do with that kind of information is say, okay, how does that then affect our business? Will we see a short-term spike in performance behavior, or actually do the customers that are in market, are they going to change their purchasing cycle? So those are the types of questions that you would then be asking from more of a macro, larger perspective of long-term, where are we going? The second type of data, which still sits under the identification part of the process, is around your brand, your product, and your competitors. So this is the area where you'd want to use both quant and qual kind of data to really get a holistic view of how customers perceive the product and the brand. And this type of data should really allow us to begin to present different areas of customer opportunity and customer problems with our products. So a great resource is always speaking to customers directly and also speaking to them continuously. So this should be done through surveys, user testing, recording tools, having a regular cadence of doing customer interviews, regularly reviewing customer reviews that are being left, customer feedback. Again, we're kind of looking at this point for trends. So that way we're able to understand if we're meeting, exceeding, or falling short of customer expectations, and also is that changing over time. We also would want to check out competitors. So what is their experience like compared to ours? What activity are they testing into? How are they monitoring different changes? Are they reacting differently to changes in the market than what we are? And also performance data. So as we mentioned earlier, looking at those product metrics, but also expanding out from those KPIs to see data around real customer behavior, so we can identify areas for improvement. So data points that often get forgotten about, for example, are like web vitals, so page performance and service errors. A slow loading page or components can lead to frustrated customers, and also us being penalized by Google, which I'm sure will not make your SEO team happy. And also fragile systems can also lead to poor overall customer experiences. So sometimes there may not be anything necessarily wrong with the product itself, but more the actual experience of that product. So questions here that really we want to be asking from our data is, what do customers feel about our product? What delights them? What are the pain points? What do customers think about our competitors or our partners' experiences? What works well? What doesn't work well? What direction are our competitors moving towards, which is a trickier question to answer, because if we knew that, then we'd all be ahead of our competitors. But it's really a great way to kind of assess and regularly check for changes on websites or apps, etc. How is our product performing? Looking at your funnel data, experience data, the results of different features? Are they under or overperforming? Is conversion falling over the long term or increasing? Are there customer engagement? Is it changing? Is the traffic mix changing in terms of marketing sources or even device? Because those things can also affect the performance that you're seeing overall. Are people returning? And also the other one is around, is there an issue with a product feature and overall experience? So back to what I was saying about Web Vitals, service errors, are those things actually affecting the performance of our product? So then as we move into the design stage, which is I define this stage not just as design, visual UI, UX, but actually a collaboration between design and engineering of how we're actually going to build this solution so we can test. This is where we want to use data to validate or invalidate the ideas that have come out of the opportunities that we've identified before moving into full development. So we can do this by using data from user testing. So concept testing, initial designs, building lightweight prototypes and getting that in front of customers to test, even using methods whereby if you've come out from an ideation with a lot of different features, put those in front of customers, ask them actually which order in terms of your priority do you think would actually have these features would actually have the most impact on your experience of the product. We can build feature fakes as well to understand a demand of a new feature, which sometimes is actually a quick way to validate a hypothesis ahead of putting the full idea into development. And at this stage, the kind of questions that we want to check from the data that we're getting is, have we understood the customer problem and the opportunity? Is there demand for this feature? Is the proposal that or the solution that we've created the right way to build? And the right way is a bit of an arbitrary way of looking at it, but should we go back and refine areas of the solution that we've come up with? Does it need stripping back? Do we need to add more things into it? And how should we prioritize those new features? So moving on to the building stage. So again, we can validate the solution here ahead of the A/B test by putting the product into usability and accessibility testing, further using customer surveys, and also doing beta testing in some of those situations as well. And really the questions that we're trying to answer here is the solution or the idea usable? And is the solution or the idea that we're addressing really addressing the customer problem or the opportunity? So as you notice at each stage of the development process, what you should be finding is your key questions starting to reduce, because if you're continually losing data to validate your development process, it should mean that hopefully some of these questions mean that you're actually going on the right track, and it should also reduce the time or effort that could possibly be wasted in terms of building a feature or designing a feature that actually is not really useful for customers. And then the final stage around experimentation and iteration. So, we've moved to the release stages. We're going live with the experiment. Everyone's holding their breath, fingers crossed, good luck charms already. As mentioned at the beginning of the talk, we're familiar with A/B testing and performance analytics, but we could further use the data that's available by doing usability testing at this point, making sure we have screen recordings up, customer surveys, also error dashboards as well, to allow us to gain a really well-rounded picture of the impact of our changes and allowing ourselves to identify if there's areas where we could iterate. So I would encourage, us digging deeper outside of just, did this test, was this test successful or not, but actually digging deeper into those data points around why a test was successful or why a test failed. So at this stage, the kind of questions that you'd really want to ask from your data is, have we, again, understood the customer problem and opportunity? how do customers now feel about the product and the solution, which is a nice comparison if you've done that at an earlier stage. Now you've released a new feature to be able to contrast and compare that. Does the solution actually work for all users, or does it work for only a segment of users? How is the product performing? So overall, how are the funnels performance? How is the experience? What do those web vitals look like? What do the service errors look like? Is there an issue with the product feature at all? And also, what should we do next? So how do we iterate, or actually should we move on to something new? So with all that being said, a word of caution, sometimes data doesn't have all the answers. Sometimes you do have to trust your gut. Trusting your gut is a bit of an imperfect science, but reality is that some products have been created whereby a customer didn't actually realize that that's what they wanted until they had it. And sometimes data can be skewed, it can be missing. And so we do need to be mindful about the amount of faith and trust that you put into data. Sometimes you do need to trust that you know your customers and you know your product well enough to go with your gut. The other point is that remember that behind every number, comment, screen recording, piece of feedback, there is a person, a human who is using your product. I always remind people a good example of this is you might see a conversion of 30%, which is great, but remember 70% of people who saw that feature maybe didn't like it. So there's always more to do. And that is really it from me. So any questions?
Thanks so
Thank
much,
you so much, Adelana. We do have some questions for you. The first two questions are somehow related, somewhat related. If an A/B test result is inconclusive, what is the next step?
Oh, I love this question. So I think that's where you should rely heavily on getting customer feedback on the A/B test, because an A/B test can only show you so much information. Like you said, sometimes it is inconclusive, and sometimes that's actually not a bad thing, depending on what the test is. For example, if you're releasing a feature and you're hoping to not disrupt the flow of a customer putting something into a basket, an inconclusive test is actually just as positive as a positive impact on the overall performance of that product, because it had no impact. But yeah, I would probably say use customer information, because actually there might be something that we're missing that an A/B test of, is it more or less significant, is not going to tell us.
Right, next one related to the first one. If an A/B test between two pages that are identical, results in one doing significantly better, what would you do to figure out what caused that result?
So it was if one of the variants.
So if an A/B test between two pages that are identical results in one doing significantly better, what would you do to figure out what caused that result?
Okay, so the first thing that I tend to do is look at what type of customers are actually going to those two pages. Is there a difference in the audience? So that's where I'm looking at, are there more mobile devices going to one page versus the other? Is there a different mix of customers using different marketing channels coming from the other? For example, are members who come from a paid search as a channel less likely to perform a particular action versus someone who's come direct? So those were the first things that I would check. I'd also check if there are any errors as well. If technically the two pages should be the same, then, and we're assuming that actually the distribution of traffic are not dissimilar, then there may be an error that we're not picking up as to why we're seeing that performance. So those are really the first places I would look.
Right, next one. In the identify phase, how do you prioritize or weigh specific data points? Are some more important than others, e.g. consumer survey results, or do you take a more holistic approach?
I tend to take a more holistic approach. I think the good thing about surveys is you get information from customers. Bad thing about surveys is that you can't ask all of your customers. So, you know, a survey or a user testing may have 20 people, may have 2,000 people, but generally speaking, you should be able to get a good understanding of a trend from a customer. If you ask 20 versus if you ask 2,000, likelihood is that if 10 or 15 customers found a particular pain point, then, you know, 500, 1,000, 1,500 should also find that same pain point as well. But I try not to try to put too much credence on any particular data point, because depending on what that data point is, you know, like I said, sometimes it can be skewed. Sometimes we can ask a question of data which is a little too pointed. And that was one of the lessons that I learned as being an analyst, is sometimes we can ask a question just to validate our own hypothesis, when actually we should look at data just overall and let it tell us what we should do next.
Do you feel like that's harder said than done?
Oh yeah, definitely. Definitely. And especially, you know, when you work quite closely to the product, you sometimes forget that you're an expert in the product, and everybody and your customers probably aren't. So the things that you may spot, some of them may be really valuable, but some of them you sometimes end up baking assumptions into whatever test that you're doing. A good example of this is, for example, we are looking at capturing end dates. I'll be hard pressed to find anybody who actually knows when their broadband is ending on the exact date. And so we need to be mindful that if we want to try and find out that information, how do you do that in a way that actually makes sense to a customer, rather than asking a question that, you know, they're just going to be like, I don't know, and you can end up really affecting the performance of your product. So yeah.
Okay, cool. We have 2 more questions. How long is the entire product cycle from identifying the trend to the final iteration?
Depends on the project. If you're doing quite a large build, a large change to a product, you know, it could take a month, 2 months, 3 months, depending on what it is. Or you could do that whole process in a week. So it really does depend on what the proposed changes. I think the first bit around identifying, so the macro parts of looking at what's happening in the industry, the cadence for that should pretty much be either every few months, so maybe every 6 months to a year, depending on if you're moving in a fast moving industry. Checking in with your customer though should probably be a more regular. When you're looking at that first stage, that should probably be happening. You know, some companies do it every week, some companies do it every 6 weeks, but it should be regular enough, because depending on your testing cycle as well, you really want to make sure that you're understanding the impact of all these changes over time. We kind of test with A/B testing. You can also test in isolation. Did that test work? Yes or no? Then you move on to a new test. Did that test work? Yes or no? We don't actually tend to then have a good assessment on the impact of all 6 tests that you released over the past, I don't know, 4 months. So, yeah.
You mentioned a little bit earlier that sometimes data can be skewed, and there are situations where it's best to go with your gut. Do you have any examples you might want to share with us when you just like, you went with your gut, you're like, yes, this is it?
I think it was when we were doing, so we were doing a bit of product development on broadband around the postcode. And we had different ways in which we were capturing that information. And, you know, in theory, you're thinking, well, we're asking the same question, really, what is the impact going to be? But my gut was telling me that actually a progressive load of that information is going to be better, because I think customers at that point were moving more towards one screen kind of form fills, content fills. We also had, the increase of users using apps as well, which really lends itself to that kind of one screen movement through a journey. And that was what actually ended up performing the best. We didn't have any concrete evidence on it. It was still quite early on at the time in terms of looking at that, and it wasn't being done on anywhere else on the site. So we didn't really know whether it was going to work or not. So the element of that whereby you don't have all that data, we used our gut. A customer, when it comes to interactions like that around UX, sometimes it is a little difficult to glean from a customer when you're asking about their feedback, whether or not that UX design is better or worse. Sometimes you do have to just run the test and see how it goes.
Well, thank you so much for your time. Thank you to both speakers. I cannot share my screen. So thank you so much for both speakers for spending time with us tonight. And thank you, Adelana and Paul. Let's give it up for them. And last but not least, thank you to our sponsor, RVU. Thank you to everyone who attended this evening. And I think Natalie is going to do the closing section.
Oh, I was just going to echo what Raluca said, really. Thank you to both our speakers, Paul and Adelana. I think, both of you gave really sort of interesting but different perspectives of how we can sort of better use data in our organizations. And really enjoyed both talks. So thanks so much. And hope everyone enjoyed this event. We're always open to feedback. So you can tweet us at RVUEng, and we'll also be uploading the videos to YouTube. So look out for them in a few days as well. Hopefully see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Hello.
Oh, hello.
Hello. Is it just us?
No.
We still have 7 participants.